Sounds good.
Let's do it.
So who has gone through the KPA process with people?
I have.
I have.
About half.
Right now.
You. So what are your takeaways from going through it with people?
Well, I can tell you one thing that I did after I gave a KPA to someone, and then I used the questions that come with the KPA based on, I mean, specifically, you just read through them. Do you agree with this? Don't you agree with this? And the person said to me, this is the best interview I've ever had. And like really meant that no one really went over stuff like this before. It was good to hear another perspective from somebody who was in corporate America. Like, you know, tell me about yourself. Why do you think you should have the job? Blah, blah, blah. None of those questions. Yeah. So the perspective from them was just fascinating. But no, I've never done it besides that one person.
You can see how they have that perspective too, because they're hearing about themselves. And you're telling them about themselves, not them telling you about themselves.
Yeah, it was cool. It was interesting.
I've gone through the process a number of times, and I have such a wide variety of sort of reactions and tones by the end of it, because it's such a long, comprehensive process that I think is alien to a lot of people, especially if you're hiring and more entry-level positions. So it sticks out to me the last few that I did. There was almost like an apologetic tone for just taking so long and doing so much. But overall, I think it was really useful for getting to know somebody.
You prep them ahead of time for what's to come so they understand.
I think that for people who have never gone through a legitimate hiring process, you can prep them, but I think largely it's kind of an abstract until they're weeks deep into it and they're, you know, learning about themselves. So I think for me, it's definitely like a skill that I'm like, you have to like hone the skill of verifying a KPA before it's going to be like as effective as it should be, as it's designed to be. Because I get a little self-conscious, like hours and hours and hours and hours into it. I'm like, okay, like there's only a little bit more, you know, like we're getting there, we're making progress, but that might just be me.
Yeah, I mean, like for me personally, I've done it multiple times too. And it's like so great going through it because you learn so much about them and they learn so much about you. But you do sometimes get to like that final motivational interview before the group interview and you have to cut them out and you're just like, oh, I just spent so much time, because it is hours and hours worth of, and I just hired 3 people on our team actually. And so it was like so much time and you're just mentally and physically exhausted after it. But if you follow it through all the steps, the outcome of it is so amazing, to find that right person. And it's a win-win for both of you by the end. So that's what I love about it personally.
So what are the conversations like of the people you're cutting out that late in the game?
Yeah, so I just follow the scripts and that the KPA offers. But really, like this last time, I had 5, it was for a showing as a position, and I had 5 good people after the motivational, and I only took 3 to group interview. So it really just came down to experience, is what it came down to. And so the conversations I had with them is like, if you would have just, you know, like they were all, the 2 that I ended up cutting hadn't had any real estate experience at all. And it's not an entry-level position. And so, you know, it just came down to it, you know, once you get, if you're still interested in getting your license or once you get some sales experience, call me and I would love for you to be a part of our team. But right now, it's just not a possibility because you don't have the experience that we need. So, but yeah, they're always great conversations. And, you know, typically they are calling and they're like, hey, you know, I have 6 months in experience. I would love to be a part of your team. And, you know, if we have a position, and we'll go through that KPA process again. And if we can make a spot, or if we have that position open, we'll make them a part of our team once they get some experience.
That's actually a great segue or like introduction, because today's topic, like addressing or using the KPA interview to assess positional and cultural fit, and then like the distinction between the people you pulled out and the people you passed through. So does anybody know what the actual KPA was designed to do? The KPA assessment itself? Well, by design, the KPA is a positional fit tool, right? So the KPA takes the position we want to hire and measures it in some sort of quantifiable way against the person and their natural ability. So it's a positional fit tool. So if you tell the KPA, you know, I want to assess this person against a buyer's agent or transaction coordinator or director of ops or whatever you're saying, the tool itself is for positional fit. So Paula, as we learned last time, this was your passion, recruiting. So being your passion, maybe you could jump in and tell us from your perspective, like how did you personally use that interview to like really narrow in on, was the positional fit correct, and then address the cultural fit too?
I think the cultural fit always came first for me. And I actually always put the thought process interview before even ordering the KPA. I would bring them through the thought process interview, because to me, the thought process interview didn't tell me totally if they were a culture fit, but gave me a really good idea if they were a culture fit.
Anything to add for the positional piece?
It's such a broad question. I guess the first thing I look at when I look at the KPA and I look at the position is where they're not a fit, and then really digging into where they're not a fit, and then going in when I have that conversation with them, I focus more on, one, you want to validate the KPA to make sure it's accurate. And then the focus for me always went to, why are they not a fit, and really digging into that. I know in a lot of admin positions, it'll come up that people don't like confrontation. So that was something I'd really dig into. Like, what does confrontation look like to you? What do you struggle with around confrontation? Because as we know, real estate can be a very confrontational job. And so just digging into where they struggled with that. Is it something they could overcome and learn from, or is it something that would really hold them back?
I spent a lot of time this week thinking about this question because I knew we were going to be discussing it with you guys. And like, to piggyback off what Paula just said, like what I heard her say was she knew position-wise, like what the key indicators for a good fit were positionally, like conflict. And then she could really dig in on those pieces. Whatever the candidate said, she knew she wanted them to define conflict for her and then talk about what maybe the struggle around conflict was. So you can't do that if you don't know positionally, like what the key indicators are for the role and like what is going to make them a good positional fit. So that's a like huge thing. I hope y'all wrote that down. And then as I was thinking about it this week, I basically was having that same thought process, but on the other side, because I was thinking about how did I fail when I first started taking over interviews. And hands down, like my number one failure was I hired good people who were positional fits. And while that does not sound like a huge failure, it was a total disaster because we as like a company hadn't ever sat down and defined on purpose our culture. And so we had a culture by default instead of on purpose. And so hiring a good person, like if you were a good like if I thought that you were a good person and a good positional fit, that qualified you to be on the team. And that's a terrible way to hire, because you end up with a sometimes complete mismatch to where you want to drive the culture and who the person is you brought on board. So that was a massive failure. And so I think like the answer to the question from my perspective lies in the question, like how do you define, like to Paula's point, positional fit, and how do you define cultural fit? And then you have to really start asking some questions about like, what is culture? Like, how do you define it in a tangible way? Because when I was doing, like when I realized my mistake, my next question was, well, what are the tangible things for culture? And then I think it's easy to lean on Keller Williams and say, okay, like mission, vision, values, beliefs, perspectives. Like you can go to the MVVBP, and I threw in standards. Like that's how you define what your culture is. Until you really do that, you can't hire to cultural fit because you don't even know what your culture is. So you can say something super vague, like we're looking for team players. That doesn't really mean anything, y'all. Like that's so hard to assess. Like that means zero. That means nothing. So until you can say, we're looking for people who will get on the phones and talk to 30 people in a day, no matter what, like they are not leaving until they talk to 30. That's different. Like that's a specific thing that you can actually look for that would talk about your culture. And that might show up as either like a standard or like a perspective on how you get your business. So you got to define it. And that was, to me, that was like my massive failure. And then my breakthrough in that arena was just like discovering how definition of culture needed to show up in our team in order to hire cultural fits. And once we kind of honed in on that, it became a whole lot easier to, in a KPA interview, turn people away who were great people and who were qualified, but they just weren't going to be a good match for us culturally. And it wasn't personal. It was, at that point, it wasn't personal. So I didn't feel like bad, like, oh, but you're a good person, you should have this job. I felt totally fine doing it because they were not a good cultural fit. So for me, that was my big aha when I started, not when I started hiring, because I did it so wrong for like a long time. But when I figured it out, that was my big aha. And then we were able to go from there. So, and I would just add for positional, although I loved what Paula said, and I probably never really honed in on that the way she just described, because I trusted the KPA, because I was like, well, the KPA was designed for positional fit. So if I validate it, that is addressing the positional fit piece. And then I learned to trust it, because a lot of times in the beginning, I'd say, this says they're a terrible match, but I really like them. Like they're such a good person. They have high emotional intelligence. It'll be fine. Like it's fine. And those people don't make it, right? Because they don't like it. Like you do them a disservice, because the KPA is telling you they will not be comfortable in this role, even though they can do it. They don't like it. And they all left. All the people I hired like that left. That was a lot of words. Zach, what have you got?
Good stuff that everyone has shared so far. So for me, I think it came down to like 3 points that really defined my point of view on both failures and success, and where you can make a difference. And it's what I currently see now with a lot of the teams that we work with. First, I would say get real clear on what your resume review looks like. Meaning, like, is there a requirement like they have to be at a job for at least 2 years? Do they have to have previous admin? Like, I don't care if it's bullet pointed, but you got to have a starting point. And what I see a lot of times is, one, we're in a lot of pain because typically we need to hire someone. So that's already going against us. And then we get overwhelmed because we put these ads out and we get all these people flooding in, and then it just goes to like, well, I talked to Megan on the phone and she's great. I think I'll send her a KPA, right? And we don't have, like, because she did some admin work 3 years ago and we feel that she would be great on the phone. Like, it's all based just on feelings when it comes to who are we going to weed out and send through the KPA. So I would highly recommend, and what I always did was create a bullet point list that goes along with the job description that says, these are my requirements before I even look at this resume and make that initial qualifying call. So now you're weeding out resumes, doing the qualifying call, right, which is track record when you use CV, and then send the KPA. So you have specific people in mind that meet your requirement. I would start there. The other part of it where I got real purposeful around is the defense portion. And a lot of teams, and I did too at the beginning, skipped that or did not really put importance behind it. And if you think about at the beginning, we're developing these requirements we need based off the job description. We've now validated that we believe they're a culture fit and a position fit based off what the KPA and what we validated through there. Now, how comfortable do you feel defending that particular candidate against peers? All right, and a best practice, and one of the things I always did, if not everybody was on board, we didn't move forward. That was just my own personal thing. Now, I would defend, but I wouldn't move forward. It would have to be a full agreement of this person. The other thing you run into when I started doing that and getting purposeful is I found I didn't know how to defend someone, right? Because I'd be like writing down notes like, okay, and then you get to a point where you're like, you know what? I really don't know if I feel comfortable bringing this to like my rainmaker or whoever's involved and defending this person, right? It makes you think about what you're really looking at and how you feel, other than like going back to what we said, like, oh, they're a great person and I think they can do this job. Like, that's not going to hold up around there. And then finally finishing up with letting up. So you do this career visioning process, which is designed to weed out those who are not a great culture and positional fit. And then we don't execute a 30, 60, 90 at a high level and have a conversation around it, which is all part of the CV process, right? Like once we validate, we move through it. Now they got to actually earn the role because they're not officially a part of the team until the end of that 90 days. So for me at the beginning, I did not set that expectation well enough. So then we had accepted offers, right? They joined the team and now I'm like, oh yeah, by the way, here's like your 90-day plan that you have to execute on. And guess what happened? It became a suggestion from me and not a standard because we didn't set that expectation up front. And now I'm just working with them. Plus I don't want to take the job back. So now we're like molding it to fit them. So I think taking the time to set that up front. So that's my 3 big lessons I learned throughout the KPA process.
I really heard from both Zach and Megan is clarity. Like you need to be so clear on so many things before you even start the process. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are clear on what your team culture is? Like it's written down, you know what it is, everybody's on the same page. Okay, Liz, that doesn't count.
3 and 2 babies. I feel like Cameron was like, nah, Liz is like, nah.
It is.
I was a yes until she said everyone understands it. And that's when I was like, I don't know if everyone else is on the same page, but it's written down and it's out there.
And that's part of having a culture is that everybody knows what your mission and vision is. Everybody's brought in part of it. You talk about it. That's all part of it. And I'm amazed at how many teams don't have that. And without that, you don't know if somebody's going to be a culture fit.
I would say for me, like we have our mission, our vision, our values, we have all of that. However, as Megan mentioned, we don't have standards, we have suggestions. And I think that's the part where we need to get clarity.
Yeah. So I
appreciate you. Well, I appreciate you bringing that up because I think too many times we only view culture as qualitative and we don't view it that quantitative aspects of the business is culture. Meaning if you're Rainmaker or you lead generates for 2 hours a day and you do it consistently, that is part of your culture and why you have success. So bringing someone in who's not comfortable with that is not only not reaching their goal, they're also out of culture, right? And that's a quantitative thing. But a lot of times we go, which I love the mission, vision, values, and beliefs, but that a lot of times is a lot of qualitative items, which sounds really great, right? Like, oh, I would love to support that cause or whatever the mission is. It's easy to get behind. And yet a winning culture has certain quantitative aspects of it, which drives the mission, vision, values, beliefs, and perspectives.
I've been rereading Start With Why. So if you coach with me, you've probably heard me reference this like 800 times in the last 2 weeks, I don't know. But it's so good, y'all, like applies to everything. So it applies here because I've heard so many of us say both the words think and feel. And it reminded me of, and Start With Why, they talk about, well, two different things, but they talk about like the neocortex versus the limbic brain. So in your neocortex, you're actually thinking things, like that's the part of the brain that controls your thought and speech. So you can like talk about what you think because that's that part of the brain. But the limbic brain is the part of your brain that feels. It's your gut decision brain. Like it also has, it's not the part of the brain that controls speech. So it can be really hard to put things into words when you have that gut, like that limbic decision. It's not actually in your gut, it's in your brain. So, you know, when we feel, like I was making a lot of limbic brain decisions, right? Like I felt they were a good person. And Start With Why does such a great job. And I'll tell you, it's on page 78 if you've got the book, so you can go reference it. But page 78, he talks about 3 degrees of certainty. And he says, the first degree is like being able to say what you think. So you have all of the what's, right? Like, they, like what Zach was talking about, like they have 2 years of experience, they have a degree in economics, like whatever you've decided are the what's that equal a good candidate, like that's your neocortex, that's your decision, like that degree of certainty is in your thinking brain, your neocortex. Then a second degree of certainty, and so when you, like his argument is like when you have a neocortex decision, like a thinking decision, you can say that you think it's the right decision. Like that's when you hear somebody say, well, I think that's the right decision, they know the what's, they're certain about the what's. Then the second degree of certainty is like the limbic brain coming into play. So it's the, I feel this is the right decision is the language there. And it's like that gut, hard to describe, like this is just a good candidate. And it's usually around, you maybe have some what's, but it's more of a non-quantitative. It's like the qualitative measure of the candidate or the person. I'm sorry if y'all can hear my kids like throwing a party in the other room. That's just my kids. So that's the second degree of certainty. Then the third degree of certainty is when you can actually address why. Big surprise, that's the name of the book, Start With Why. So when you can address why, those when you say, that's the telling, like verbalization of that is, I know it's the right decision. And that's because you're bringing together the quantitative and the qualitative measures, but you're doing it in such a way that has that inspirational, like the origin of the idea. So like if you, for instance, take it to, well, let's just take it to like a listing appointment, because that would be, we all understand that language. Like when you're looking for somebody who wants to buy or sell real estate, it doesn't matter if they want to move to New York. That's just like where they're going. Or if they're a buyer that they want 4 bedrooms, it's just what they want. It's why they want it that makes this an actual decision that they know is right, right? I want 4 bedrooms because my wife is pregnant with our 4th kid and I am going to lose my mind if we don't get like 1 extra bedroom to shove these children into. Or I'm moving to New York because I got a new job and the position starts in September and I've got to be there. That's like that's the why that they're doing it on a very small why scale, right? So that makes them not only really like a sticky person, but it makes them certain because they have that third degree of certainty. Like they know it's the right thing to do. So same for when we're like putting together our recruiting appointments and going on these interviews, if we are talking about our candidates and how are we going to be able to look at a candidate and say, I know this is the right candidate, then we've got to start with why. Like, why are we recruiting? How does our team think about its mission? So back to the mission vision concept. He talks a lot about Apple and how Apple's mission actually is described as to disrupt the industry. Like, it's not to sell computers, that's just how they disrupt things. And so if you're like an agent of disruption, if that's your mission statement, you could sell computers, you could sell cars, you could sell houses, doesn't matter. Apple just chose to use computers and iPods and tablets and whatever, but Dell doesn't have that same why, and so they hire a different kind of person, they sell to a different kind of person. But knowing that, like having that third degree of certainty to have that, you've got to know why. So sorry, lots of words, but page 78 on start with why, so good, so applicable to what we've been talking about today.
Megan, I think it's worth pointing out, and this is more of just thinking out loud, so I would love to hear your response. What I also heard you say as far as the candidate is they're going to go through those same degrees as we're going through this process and discussing what our vision, what our culture, what it looks like to be in this role. And what I found interesting about what you're saying is I think that can show up when they start questioning the process and the length of it. Because you have to ask yourself, then do they actually want this? Do they know why they want this particular job outside of just, I need a job, right? Like, are they fully bought in? And when they're uncertain of that, then this comes into question of like, hey, is this process too long? Or was like, this is crazy. And that type of language, which we've all had showed up. So I think that's interesting to point that out.
Zach, it's so funny that you say that because it popped into my head. One of our, part of our culture on the team is you had to be growth minded. And those people that were excited for the next part of the interview process because they were going to learn something about themselves, those ended up being our best people on the team because they showed up so growth minded all through the process.
Well, what thoughts or questions or comments does everyone have so that we can do a little masterminding around the topic?
Zach, you mentioned like making sure that they have, like they understand the 30, 60, 90 and you get that put together up front. Do you put that in front of them before you actually hire them? Or do you wait until like after you hired them and then just be like, and here's now the plan?
At the beginning, I did it the latter, the way you explained it, and I didn't have success. So before presenting the offer and kind of laying out what the vision is and covering that, I also would go in depth with what that first 90 days would look like and what our expectations was. So they had everything in mind to prepare them for what that would look like should they accept the offer. So at the end, I started covering it that way.
I have a question about defining your team's culture. I don't know who to direct this toward, but do you think that as an exercise, this should be a top-down? So let's say there's already a small team, a relatively young team. Does that sound like a group activity? Or is that kind of like the lead agent kind of taking an inventory and setting down their ideas and kind of passing it out? Or are there any structured resources for exploring this idea or this concept with a team that you're aware of?
So let me share something just because we had our culture, our mission, vision very tied in from the beginning, and yet we rebranded along the way. So we actually hired a company to come in and help us do all that. And as this company who does this, they do it as a group. So they come in and they start with values, and they just say, just throw out to me what values you guys have. And so we just sat there as a group and just threw out all these values, and he wrote them down. So just coming from having experienced it from a company who does this for a living, they did it with us as a group.
Got it.
I would add to that, Nick, just like Paula's team was like a mature team, like as a, and that could go really not how you wanted if you had like 3 people and 2 of them were bad hires. You know what I mean? So like, just be careful with that, I guess.
Got it.
Yeah.
There is, to start with why, not to get back on that bandwagon, there's a partner book, Find Your Why, and it walks through 2 different variations. One is like doing it with the owner of the company, if the owner of the company still exists or inside the company still exists, and one is doing it with the team if the owner of the company no longer exists. And I think the reason they do that is because if the owner is still there, it doesn't matter if like there's 40 people on the team, but the owner is still there and the 40 people have 10 values that the owner doesn't have. 1 year from now, like that could be like in the garbage, because those 40 people may or may not be a revolving door, and the owner is ultimately going to like poo-poo all over whatever values they don't have if they're still making a lot of the day-to-day decisions. So I think that could be variable. Like Paula was in the middle of a golden handoff, so there's like a lot of factors at play.
Got it. Yeah, I know that, you know, I'm relatively new, and coming into my team, I know there was a mission, vision, values sort of set up, but I've sort of like hulked into like such a huge part of my team now that I want to sort of have a fresh look at what that looks like and put my fingerprints on it more, and not have it be sort of just sound nice but not really mean anything. So something for me to think about what I want my team culture to look like, and hopefully that will be very similar to the rest of the team, or like what we've got going on.
Yeah, and I agree with Megan in the fact that if it does not resonate with the team owner, I mean, that's the most important person, because they'll ultimately set the tone for that. So it has to resonate with them, has to.
Can it be, in your opinion, aspirational even for the team owner, or are we really looking for something that they embody and exemplify every day in all of their actions and all of their words? You know what I mean? Like, do we want to all aspire to embody this culture, or do we want this to just be like to define like who we are now, where we are now?
So I heard, who was it? Paula, you were probably in the same session. I don't even think we knew each other back then, but there was a family reunion where it was like Jay Papasan, and I don't remember, but anyway, and they were talking about this, and what they said really stuck with me. And it was basically that a lot of teams write these like aspirational culture statements, and that's crap. Like, it should be who you are, not who you want to be. Like, you could write down like, you know, we never quit, we legion for 3 hours a day, and if everyone does 30 minutes, that's done. Like, don't say that. Like, that's just not who you are, you know. So
we can't just use this document to trick new team members into behaving but we don't do it ourselves. Okay.
Yeah, something like that. And when you think about it, like taking it back to like Apple, like if your culture is a culture of mavericks, right, then like you want to hide, like you want that to be true. Like you wouldn't want them to put together a document for people coming in saying like, we're very buttoned up and we're very proper and prim, and because they're going to feel like totally duped when they get inside and figure out you're all a bunch of rule breakers and you don't follow any rules, and you like, that's your culture, you know?
Yeah.
So even if you want to be very buttoned up, but you're a maverick, just say that. I mean, say what it is, you know?
Yeah. Now, I think your mission, your overall mission or whatever that goal is, could be a little aspirational because it's what you're striving to achieve ultimately with the business, the philanthropy part of it, right? The values, though, I'd agree with Megan. Like those, I think, need to be, because those are the way you're interacting with each other, your clients, like the behaviors and expectations and those values of members in the team. So that should be what it is.
Got it. That makes sense.
Gary Keller defines vision as like what it will look like on the way to accomplishing your mission, or what it will look like when you get there. So both those things wrapped up in the vision. I think like the mission and vision are the place for the aspiration and the future, but values are just values, right? Like it shouldn't be, man, I really wish I valued harmony, but I actually super value individualism. Like, why? Just say the individualism.
And when you guys think about values and culture in a professional setting, I know it's probably not the best, but do you think about sort of, I don't know how to say it without saying the word like politics or like worldview, like do you take that into account when you talk about culture? Because that's sort of how I would define culture broadly, maybe not necessarily in a professional setting. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know that I'm following the question.
Like when you're looking for cultural fits, are you looking for people who share your worldview, not just in the way that they work?
Do you mean like Keller Williams, God, family, and then business, and in that order?
I mean, yes, sort of, or you know, the opposite of that, or any variation of that.
I think to me it would depend on how important, how big of a piece that played in your culture. Like,
Right.
Like if that was something really ingrained in everybody and really important to everybody, then yeah, that would be in the forefront. And yet if that's not, I don't know how to explain that, what I'm thinking.
So when I'm like going through resumes, I have like a bias towards in favor of things like diversity, or like making sure, you know, that I'm looking at trying to ascertain sort of like life experiences and things like that, and not necessarily just like output. So I'm just wondering if anyone has any thoughts on that. Inclusivity, diversity, things like that. Like, is that part of your culture? Yeah.
Please, Leah.
I've had the opportunity to work with some teams in the U.S. and watch the career visioning process with them. And I think I understand your question to the extreme that you're asking it, and not right or wrong, but I had one team, and I think this example might help, that they were very highly religious in their religious beliefs, and they did not work on Sundays, and they did not want anyone on their team working on Sundays. And so that was part of their missions and their culture, and they wanted people that fit, not that they wouldn't necessarily hire someone that didn't go to their church or something like that, but that was important to them. Mm-hmm. And then I had because I always feel like I'm working on finding people that fit the team culture and fit their vision fits within our vision. And so if you have somebody that you feel like they're so far out of that, of those belief systems that you're trying to build, that's going to create conflict amongst other team members, whether their political views, their sexual orientation, any kind of that's still something that has to be taken into consideration. I just don't know how much weight you would put on it unless it's like that's how your team runs. Like we had 8th day, Keller Williams 8th day team, where that was the name of the team. So I think it just really depends on what it is specifically that you're focused on.
Got it.
I think that's a great answer, Leah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a terrific answer. I would just add, you have to be careful because you don't want to cross that line of what's discrimination, right? And where are we ignoring? So I think it comes back to sharing that mission, vision, values, and how that shows up in the business, and explaining it in such a way that allows them to decide if that's a great culture fit is important. Right, because if we're really clear that our office is closed, like let's say, I wouldn't say for religious beliefs we're closed on Sunday, but if you say our office is closed on Sunday and we don't expect our agents or office admin to work on Sunday, that would be a way where you're sharing the culture that allows them to decide if this is a great fit.
And I think like when you have diversity and inclusion, like, and you put an emphasis on that, I think you get better teams overall because people have different ideas. And yet, to like what Leah was saying, if there's a violation in the core mission, vision, value, just because it's a diverse candidate, if there's a violation there, it wouldn't make sense to onboard them.
Understood. So it's like it has to be holistic, but it just has to be like another piece of the whole puzzle.
I think it'll show up real quick too. I mean, if you've got somebody that's so far to the right or the left of what it is that we're talking about here,
right,
you automatically know that's going to potentially become an issue. And if you're, it's one thing when everybody accepts everybody for who and what they are, whatever we're talking about. And, you and I might have completely different religious beliefs or backgrounds, but I personally accept and love everybody for who and what they are. So therefore I can work on a team that may have certain beliefs that I don't necessarily participate in. But then if you've got somebody on the other side of that is going to go out and protest against something, or that kind of thing, and then that's violating your portion of that culture. Right. So I think it shows that, and it'll show itself real quick in the career visioning process, pretty much, I think.
Can I use MAPS as an example real quick? Like take it out of teams and just talk about MAPS. MAPS is basically one big team of coaches, like 150 coaches, but MAPS like mission statement is to change the course of human trajectory. That's a really big, like if you can get behind that big why in a passionate way, there's a place for you in MAPS. And there's like one of all of us, like there's somebody who's this and there's someone who's that. And I mean, so it's not like we are all homogenous, but because the belief and the mission is big enough that like we can get passionate about it, it doesn't matter like pretty much the rest of it because we're all in on that. So, we're all in on helping our clients change the trajectory of their own lives to change the course of human trajectory. Like that's a really big why, right? That is, if you're a coach, you buy into that. And like, I've never sat down and been like, where could I pick a fight with a coach who's different than me? Like nobody does that in the coaches. Like it's not even a thing. Like it's not a thing. Like I've never been in a team where it's so little a thing. And so I think if you've got super clear on your mission, vision, value statement, then you can like take your pick from what's available to you diversity wise, but they've got to be all in on the mission.
Right.
It's a great question, Nick. Thanks for bringing it.
Really good question.
What else, guys? We got 15 more minutes.
Does anyone have any examples of when they were maybe interviewing someone who was a really good cultural fit and just maybe not a positional fit? Like, was there, like, how did you go about maybe like finding a different position to bring them into?
That's why I love the job fit report, like, because it shows you the, you know, the percentages of where they might be a potential fit and if there's an opening. And I've used it, I've had somebody that was a great cultural fit for Keller Williams in general, but not for what we were hiring for. So I knew there was other teams in the market center or different places in the market center that they would fit. And that's why I love getting that one report along with the rest of it, because I can see, and it also helps me look at where they don't fit for those don't fit questions too. So getting that entire thing gives it a better perspective and leaves it open for opportunities for them.
I think for us, when we've hired people who were definitely a great cultural fit, this example is a TC for a virtual TC company that we run. We strive to sort of alter their trajectory more than like see if they can be in a different position. Or one of the hires we have, we just loved her so much and she's great. She had no experience, but super longevity at her last position. She's like retired with a pension at like 45. And it's just been amazing. But we know now that her being in the trenches, she'll never be that director or that manager. So which is what we had envisioned for this hire. Like we really wanted this to be foundational where they would eventually step up and we could hire under them. And just it's such a culturally, it's such a great fit, and just like the attitude, the hard work, and everything. But we know now that after a year and a half, that they're never gonna jump up. They're never gonna be able to handle a position of authority. So we're sort of altering their trajectory and changing the conversations around their future based on what they're comfortable with now, and then altering our hiring to sort of fill that gap. So it's kind of a win-win, more a win for them because we have to hire somebody else that will eventually take that role. But
on our team, if they're like a great culture fit, but for the job they're not necessarily a great fit, we just had one where we made a position for her. We and I know that doesn't work for everybody that is a great culture fit on your team, but we thought she would be such a big asset for our team that we made an admin position on our team for her. We made her an EA because we thought that that's what her job fit was telling us that she was good at, and that was her experience. And so we made that position on our team for her because we thought she would be a big asset culturally and just growth wise. And she has been a big asset on our team. So that's what we personally try to do. I know that you can't always add somebody, so we always keep in touch and try to find somebody within the market center that they would fit on their team that kind of matches our culture.
Yeah, I've quite a bit did the self-discovery too. You can share your org chart if you have that. And a lot of times based on that org chart and when you're sharing that mission and you start describing different jobs, I've gone a little bit more detail than I normally would. And you certainly can start seeing the body language and feel that energy shift to other roles, right? And other things that may get an excitement and then transitioning them into a pipeline or more of a nurture if you're unable to create the role. But I agree with Samantha. I think if you have someone that's talent and it can benefit and move your team forward, I think it's worth if you can do it to make that happen.
Yeah.
What else?
I have a question that maybe you guys can share. So I recently took over a team that I kind of knew we were like I think when I got here there was 12 people on the team, and we're down to 4 now, by pretty much by choice. And I found that because I didn't make the hires, so that's kind of been part of the challenge, because I have gone back and CV'd and done some one-on-ones to get to know the team members that I do currently have. And obviously doing career visioning moving forward. Just when you know that some of them don't necessarily have the, like, they're good workers and they have good intentions, but I don't know that the culture and the mission and the vision were clear when they were hired. And so it's been a little bit of a challenge to go backwards. And I just don't know if anyone else has had that same experience and kind of what they did with it.
There's many a team out there that has had that same experience.
I mean, that is a classic, like, I even hired some of them and that was my problem, right? Because I started out not really knowing who to hire. And yeah, it's a struggle. I think the most important thing to do is to get everybody on board, to have the reset of, you know, like, hey, I know things maybe have been different in the past, moving forward, like, and own that, right? Like, and that's nobody, it's not your fault. Like, our DNA is that as a team, like the team didn't set you up here for success or whatever, but moving forward, like, this is, you know, this is our vision. But I think you have to start with selling the vision piece. And when I figured out what I had done so badly, we spent an entire fall retreat. We didn't like talk about anything else. It was just all vision. It was like, here's the possibilities, like, let's sell. It was kind of like the greatest show, like, you're selling the possibility, right? This is the future, it's amazing, and this is where we're headed. And then you talk about, like, here's why we want to drive it this way, like, here's what it's going to be like, here's the big why of the team. And then you earn the right to talk about the how and, like, the what, you know, what's going to be required of you, how's it going to look on a day-to-day basis. But I think if you've messed up as a team, like, I know you just arrived on the scene, Leah, but like, if as a team, like, this has not been clear, I think you have to reset with a big, not like a, hey, this has just been wrong and we're going to kind of like scoop it under the rug, but like, this is a big deal. Like, the team's getting in line with a bigger calling, like a big purpose. And it should be a big deal, you know?
Yeah.
Cool. That's my perspective anyway. It's my 2 cents.
I like that.
So would some of you be willing to share what your vision, what your team vision is?
Love that question. Does anyone even know it? Like, let's just be honest with each other for a minute. Would anybody even know what it was without looking or trying to find a paper with it on there?
I don't mind jumping in here on that one. It's for our team, it's something that you know, we've recognized as a big deficiency. You know, our Rainmaker has one vision for the team that, you know, the agents that have been hired don't necessarily feel the same way. And, you know, our Rainmaker is all about trying to be at the top, you know, full service real estate brokerage in the greater Lansing area. But our agents are very much about trying to balance that work and life, time and commitment, which has been a problem we've realized for trying to meet the Rainmaker's vision for things. And so we have recognized that it's back to the drawing board, and we need to kind of recapture what that means. And I think some of the points that we brought up here have been really helpful in terms of acknowledging what we really are versus what we want ourselves to be, because, you know, I think the fallout rate or the loss rate will be higher if we set this mission and vision for what we want to be, and then accept work or, you know, other team members here that aren't on that same page.
So insightful, Jose. Thank you for that.
You know, and it's hard. I have tried to, I've loved listening to everyone's perspectives on here, because I think the reality, and I brought it up last week, was that, you know, this stuff changes so frequently, given, you know, your agent turnover, and even a couple agents that come and go really can change the makeup of the team. And it's worth, you know, looking back at what you would say are team standards, and making sure that they're accurately codifying what you are, instead of what you wanted to be maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Great point.
I have ours. I don't have it memorized. I should. However, it's on the back of some of our business cards, and so it's easy to grab. Ours is: we seek to improve people's lives through creative real estate solutions.
I have ours too. It's for our clients and communities to thrive through their incredible experiences in real estate and in life.
I'm going to throw this out there. Nobody be mad. But if you had to go look at it, your team's not living it. Like, you're a big vision that everyone can get behind. Everyone would just know. You would just know it. And that's like nothing against not knowing it, except for that as a team, you guys aren't embodying that. And then my question would just be, is it the right statement? You know, is it the right statement for you?
Our vision when I was on the team was changing lives through real estate. And it's always sat with me because that could apply to anybody. It could apply to our clients. It could apply to the agents. It could apply to the admin team. It applies to everybody. How does real estate change your life?
I love that. I really like that.
Any last thoughts in our last 30 seconds together?
Just thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate all of your great insight. I
Appreciate you
took
guys.
so many notes.
Good. Paula, do you remember what our topic is next week? I don't remember it off the top of my head.
I don't.
She's got a way better memory than me.
You haven't embodied it yet.
Clearly I've not embodied the list of.
Although she put it all together, I'm just reading what Megan put together.
I have to ask Paula routinely. I'm like, did we actually, somebody will say something, I'll be like, did we talk about that, or did I just black out, or what happened? She's like, yeah, Megan, we did it. It's fine. Okay.
Okay, so the next week is a deep dive on the MREA2 organizational model, when and who to hire. So it goes right along with this week.
Oh, perfect.
Yay.
See everybody next week.
See you next week.
See everyone next week.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.